Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our soil nutrient trends webinar this morning with Farmers Edge Laboratories. We're excited to have both Patrick Visser, Lab Director, and Chris Kennard, Director of Farm and Retail Growth, with us this morning. We actually had put this on at one of our events a couple weeks ago in Regina, and we felt the data that was presented was definitely worth sharing across a broader market, especially for those that couldn't get to Regina that day. And so we're glad that you're here this morning to take part, and especially at a time heading into 2026 where we look at cost of crop production and the economics of farming and understanding where things are going from a chemistry perspective and a nutrient threshold levels across our country. And Patrick has done an amazing job putting together a metrics that is easy to understand. And we have folks on here this morning from every corner of Western Canada and even Ontario. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to Patrick and allow him to show you what he's been able to put together that hopefully will give you some information heading into your upcoming cropping season.
Great. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I'm joined here as well with Chris Kennard. We'll have a couple of summary words here at the end, but glad to be here. Thanks for the invite. Thanks everyone for making some time out of your day. And let's get started. So just a little bit of background on our lab. Opened first in 2009. I've been with the lab since that time, so approaching 17 years now. Was open primarily for internal, an internal service provider to Farmers Edge, and then in 2023 made a very serious commitment to opening up for all interested parties, and that has gone really well. We're seeing a lot of new business and a lot of new volume with our partnership with Taurus that we started in 2015, and a couple of shots of our lab here. Front door, ICP lab there in the middle, one of the analytical labs, and then a portion of our extraction lab here on the right. So with that out of the way, so we are going to look at data that's for soil samples that have come through our lab for crop years 2022 right up until crop years 2026. And so I've got to at least clarify how this data has been prepared, because there's always bias in it. So I'm going to call out that bias. So there's a participation bias. Of course, all the data in here, of the soil samples and the test results for those soil samples are fields that are, regularly getting soil tested. So there's we can't speak, of course, for the soil we don't test. We can't speak about the soil that doesn't get tested in our labs. So that's what we're looking at here. There's also a bit of a bias in the sampling design. Nearly all the samples, like over 98% of the samples in this data set, are double depth sampled. So 0 to 6 and 6 to 24. There is a bit of a mix of sampling design. So we wanted to include a lot of fields so that we have, a good representation of data across all these years, across the whole area that we're going to look at. But we do have an intermix of composite sampled fields and variable rate or zone sampled fields. So the way that I've contended with this is I've dissolved the zone sampled fields into a composite equivalent. And so because zones have different areas, we didn't want very small areas, with, say, for example, a high phos test value to overwhelm the average for that field. So we used what's called an arithmetic weighted averaging, and that basically lets us dissolve that field's soil test values to the field level out of the zones, and then allow those to kind of participate in the same way. There are a lot of samples that were removed here. So we do get garden samples, lawn, turf grass, horticultural samples. They're not included. So we're really looking at broad acre fields, same that you would be managing yourselves. So there is a little bit of a bias in here that nearly all of these samples, over 90% of these submissions to the lab are submissions by or fields that are managed by agronomic professionals. So we don't have a lot of fields in here where there's a grower submitting it and then maybe they're trying to go sort out how they're going to develop their fertility plan. Most of these samples that are submitted are from agronomic professionals. So a bit of a bias in there as well. The bias is that they're probably going to be managed better than the fields that are not managed by agronomic professionals. So we're going to look at a lot of spatial data, and in order to group that regionally, I use the Government of Canada Soil Landscapes of Canada geometry layer. And inside of that geometry layer, we have Ecodistrict polygons. They are, we'll have a look at the polygons in a sec, but they are, that data set does group these eco-districts into like the local surface form, the soil development, textural group, land use class, and then a few things around precipitation and temperature. They're also defined by having whether they got permafrost layers or not, but that's not relevant, so we're ignoring that part. Long and short, I think it's a very good data set that defines these regions pretty well. And we'll see how well those perform in this analysis. And frankly, we paid for it, so we may as well use it, right? So let's have a look. These polygons, these gray polygons, these are ecodistricts, and yeah, they are they are defined across across Canada with the parameters that we looked at there. So this is all across Canada. And here is here's a snippet. This is Diefenbaker here. I think some of the best freshwater cod fishing I'm told in Canada. We got Regina here, and there's a whole bunch of eco-districts. Can you see them? How about now? So these are a snippet of these eco-districts. Again, these red polygons that surround these areas all have similar landform, textural class, land use, precipitation, temperature. I'll flip back again. And then if we define the layers from the Soil Landscapes Canada, you can see them here. So you can see a contiguous region here, and we'll treat each of these polygons separately. So last time I'll go back and forth, and you can see the eco-districts as defined there. And then yeah, there's Regina right here in this little dot. Okay, so we'll get on to the analysis real quick and have a look at some of the data. The colored in green areas here, this is where we have more than one field sample and very good continuity across all the years. So this is kind of like all fields in the data set, and I'm gonna peel some of those back, that participation layers a little bit back here as we go, because if we just have one field being tested in that eco-district across 7 years, well, it doesn't really speak for the whole eco-district. So the non-colored areas where we have not seen a soil sample across the survey range of those 7 crop years. If I score these, what I'm scoring here is how much participation do we have? So do we have a lot of fields in all years, or do we have sort of poorer coverage where we might have 10 or 20 fields, but they're not in every year, so we can't generate very good trends from them, and so we remove those. So more red is poorer coverage, less fields, less consistently across all years, and green is like higher participation, lots of fields, and we're finding them in every year. So what that leaves us with here is these are the eco-districts where we have both high field participation rates and high annual participation rates. So I feel that these areas we can actually speak very clearly to, and we've got good data coverage across all years and across fields. So these are the remaining eco-districts for that.
I just make note, if you do have a question, if you can't talk, you're muted, but you can ask a question in the chat. We'll either answer it as we go, or we'll leave it till the end and try to get that addressed.
Great. Thanks, Craig. Okay, onward here. So if this is pretty zoomed out, we've got pretty good coverage across the prairies. We've got a little bit here in southern Ontario, but because we've got a primarily prairie audience here, we'll just zoom in on the area. So we've got Moose Jaw, Saskatoon, Regina, Vermilion, and Lloydminster, Edmonton up here, Lethbridge down here, Winnipeg here, just to get you oriented a little bit. So we got this is the area that we'll be looking at. So strong representation across all fields, many years participating, and so we'll remain kind of more focused on this this kind of area of interest for the remainder of the slides. Last bit on sort of sampling intensity. So here we've got within the sort of valid ecodistricts, we've got good coverage across many years, across many fields. There's a little bit of mixed representation here. Some areas are very intensely sampled. We've got much better coverage on, and then some are. While these all have very good coverage over years and over a number of fields, we have a little bit of disparity here in coverage. So. Onwards. This is the first question I always get when the combines start rolling and winter wheat comes off is, what's the residual nitrate doing? So we're looking here at residual nitrate. The way that these are classified here are, we looked at the residual nitrate in the full depth, the 0 to 24. So this is samples starting from early, maybe mid-August up until Christmas. The red fields, more red is fields or ecodistricts testing with residual nitrate over 60 pounds per acre in the 0 to 24. So here the deficiency index we've got here. So to explain this is in the ecodistricts that are colored in white. They have, in this case, 10 to 20% of fields in there are testing over 60 pounds. And then conversely, if we get up to the darker red areas, over 40% of fields in these ecodistricts are testing over 60 pounds per acre. So a few notes here. What happened in this area? Well, this is not far from my home here. We planned for a big crop, and it didn't rain. So that's pretty consistent with what we would sort of expect there. The other thing that I'd note is, a little bit of a temperature check on, how well are these ecodistricts performing as far as being able to categorize soils. And we do see a fair bit of continuity in here. While there are about, I'm going to guess about 20 ecodistricts in this region, they all behave very similarly. So the ecodistricts seem to hold as a pretty good base geometry to group samples. I've seen some presentations like this where they group them by either rural municipality or by county, and I think this is a pretty good selection. It seems to show that there's a pretty contiguous performance in these across these ecodistricts here. So in general, lower occurrence of residual nitrate in most of the prairie provinces, but we've got some ecodistricts here where we've got, again, a high prevalence of fields testing over 60 pounds per acre nitrate in the 0 to 24. I'll just set the stage for the remainder of the slides here. What we're going to look at is the treat. Now the nutrient is going to vary, of course. We're going to look at the major nutrients and some of the micros. But what we're looking at here, the way that this data is being prepared, is we're looking at the prevalence of deficiency. So how often is the field deficient in whatever nutrient we're going to look at here? And so the nutrients are going to vary. The deficiency classification is going to vary by nutrient, but the approach is always going to be the same. So what we're looking at here is, and you'll see this, the reason I'm mentioning is you're going to see this approach repeated in the remainder of the slides. So we'll start with Olsen phosphorus. So this is a test that's often used in Manitoba for two reasons. One, it matches the soil really well. That test is designed for the types of soils they have there. calcareous, high pH soils. And we have a little bit of that in southeast Saskatchewan as well. So that's where we see this this test most often used. The 15 parts per million is the cutoff that I said. Below that we've got a pretty significant deficiency, and so that's the cutoff that's used here. So the scoring, green, lower occurrence of a field being deficient. Red is a higher occurrence of the field being deficient. So we've got some areas here where we've got where we have repeated deficiencies in the Olsen P test. Again, you can see here from this using the Ecodistrict seems to be a pretty good measure because we have good continuity in the neighboring region. So Winnipeg down here, Regina, Saskatoon, just to get you oriented here a little bit. But we do see some deficiencies here in the interlake of Manitoba, and then up towards Riding Mountain National Park, and then in this part here of Saskatchewan. So, and this is across the full survey range of 7 years. So we've got where we've got deficiencies, we've got serious deficiencies that are long term. The other question is, for the Olsen phosphorus tested soils, what's going on across the 7 years? So if we look here, this is where we're seeing. So in the first slide, I've kind of got 5 categories, from green to that sort of tan, orange to red. So kind of 5 classes here of deficiency occurrence. And then what we're going to look at, and this repeats for the remainder of the slides, is, and what's the trend? So in this, for these slides, when we're looking at the change in deficiency, red is that they're increasing. The trend overall, if you look from the 2020 to the 2026 crop year, the trend is that the Olsen P fields testing with the Olsen P are increasing in deficiency in the red areas. So where we've got, what's kind of remarkable here is that we've got, increasing deficiency in this interlake area, and they're already deficient. So this, I've always kind of felt that in certain areas of Manitoba, at least, that some areas are dropping like a part per million Olsen P per year, and they have been for about the last 15 years. So trend over time here. There's definitely some areas that are dropping. The trend is going down. Some areas the trend's going up. Another way we can score this, so I looked at the Olsen P in Manitoba specifically, and then we've got crop years here, and then the scoring along here. And so what we're doing is within each crop year, we're scoring what the Olsen phosphorus is, and we're scoring the kind of the deficient, marginal, optimum, and excess. So we've got the fields that are testing optimum. It's about steady. It's around 15% of fields that are routinely and consistently testing in the optimum area. Overall, fairly stable system, I would say. So we've got a good representation of deficient and marginal. They are you stack these two bars, they are the majority. But we've got a risk of sort of slipping into a chronic deficiency here. We look at it over time. The modified Kelowna phosphorus is another one that we offer. This one is typically used it's primarily used in Alberta. It's mostly used in Saskatchewan, aside from areas where whoever's submitting the soil sample knows that they should probably be using the Olsen phosphorus method. But this is the representation for the modified Kelowna. And this again is scoring the number of fields that are deficient. Deficiency cutoff is below 20 parts per million modified Kelowna P rather. And so here we've got again the 5 classes. So Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, Regina. I'm sure everyone's got themselves oriented here, but we have areas that are in green here that are testing deficient less frequently. There's less prevalence of deficient fields in these areas here, and then we've got some areas in between, of course, and then some areas that are chronically testing deficient across the 7-year survey. Up in the Peace region, about half of them across the 7-year survey are testing deficient. Next, we'll look at what the changes are. So I just left off on the Peace country here. While they are, about half of them are testing deficient, the trend overall is that they are going up. It seems to be over the 7 years that we are building to some extent. So less prevalence of deficiency over that 2020 to 2026 range. But then we definitely got some areas here where they are dropping. Similar charting to what we looked at for the Olsen phosphorus, but this is now split into the same 4 categories: deficient, marginal, optimum, and excess. And then we divided here. This is the performance in Saskatchewan and then the performance in Alberta. Most of them are testing marginal. This is a fairly stable system. So I've looked at this 2 ways. Either someone's doing something very smart and just saying, well, because these are the residual soil tests. These are all, post-harvest soil tests that are coming in. Either someone's incredibly clever to say, well, let's just come out at the end of the year at marginal and then give it a little shot of phosphate and then drawing that down. That could be one way to look at it. That, or crop inputs prices on phos are just too high to build. But we do have a stable system with about 60% of fields in Saskatchewan and Alberta that are being submitted to our lab that are testing marginal rather.
Yeah, so if you add the marginal and deficient, it could be 80.
It's about 80. Yeah, 80%. Yeah, it's I would say that it's, well, if we just look at some of the numbers here, reliably 75% of fields are testing deficient in phos using the modified Kelowna test method.
Okay.
Because we're covering the major nutrients anyways, potassium, we'll have a quick look at it. In general, of course, we're a net exporter of potassium in especially Saskatchewan, but we do have some isolated areas where we've got potassium routinely testing below 150 parts per million. So particularly here, this sort of Cold Lake, Vermilion, Lloydminster area, we're seeing some lower potassium. A couple of the ones north of Prince Albert here. But in general, this should not be a surprise to anyone. In general, we've got sufficient potassium, aside from cases where you got maybe a strong straw oat or you're pushing a cereal where you might need a little bit extra. But this is those are case by case basis, and an agronomic professional will know that to make some applications. So a little bit of marginality here, and again, we've got really good consistency, and sort of tells me that these eco districts are probably a pretty good choice to use to categorize these areas. The one thing to note here, while we have some trends where the potassium seems to be going down at least a little bit, kind of my areas of concern here are kind of this region, where I think you start to get into, these are gray wooded soils we start to get into, because they're not only testing deficient, but the trend is that they're there's more prevalence of fields testing deficient in those areas. Another one call out here is in the Peace country, where we've got some marginal, some fields, maybe half of them, 60% of them testing in that deficient range, but they are dropping. So sulfate deficiency here, the cutoff I've got for deficiency is under 10 pounds per acre in the 0 to 6. A whole lot of green, but if you recall, we did have some soils from Southern Ontario, and I'll just zoom over to that, and that's actually where we find most of those. When we look at the entire data set, I mean, this looks pretty green. We didn't see a lot of the different colors in the five classes of deficiency. But the reason that is that this is overwhelmed by this area of southern Ontario that we get some samples from, where they're routinely testing deficient. And we're on to the micros. So we'll look at zinc, copper, boron, and iron. Manganese I kind of left out of here. Manganese is a special case. The only time I really ever see deficiencies where we've got a lot of wetting and drying and that sort of stuff. And they tend to be really case by case, so I'm not going to examine them. They're a little bit trickier to kind of catch by the tail. Again, 5 classes here. More red is more frequently testing deficient. More green is less frequently testing deficient. So we've got some areas here, the Peace, this area of Alberta, very low prevalence of fields routinely testing testing deficient rather for zinc in the 0 to 6. But we've got some regions here where there is more prevalence of that. On the next slide, we've got the overall the trend change of the of zinc deficiencies, and so some concerns might be, there's a few areas here that we can look at. Some of these areas here are, reliably deficient, and there's an overall trend that zinc is dropping in those areas as well. We've got boron here, critical limit of half part per million boron. Large contiguous regions here of fields testing sufficient, probably likely with no application needed. And then we've got some areas here, more of this kind of palliser triangle, this dry land area here that we've got a good proportion of fields across that 7-year survey that are routinely showing up as deficient in boron. Overall change, so some of these areas the trend is that they're testing deficient, but over time they're more frequently testing deficient. So more fields showing up in that class. So a little bit of trouble here to watch out for boron in some of these areas. There's some other ones in here. Yeah, some small areas around Carberry where we've got Carberry, Verdon, Brandon, where we've got that sort of that change in boron over time. Copper deficiency is pretty isolated. In general, now with the exception of this sort of interlake area, it's sort of the more peaty or muckier soils tend to behave that way for copper. But in general, using a half part per million as the cutoff, we don't tend to see a lot of copper deficiencies. Again, a little bit here, Cold Lake, Lloydminster, Vermilion, a little bit up here in the Peace Country as well. I would say maybe half of the fields in these areas are testing deficient in copper. Now have a look at the trends next here. So kind of a bit of a watch out what the data is telling us here. Peace Country, half of them, 50 to 60% of them are testing deficient, and the overall trend is that they are going to continue testing deficient in the survey range that we looked at here. Okay, iron deficiency, critical limit set of 4.5. There's really none to speak of. A couple little areas. If anyone's operating these areas, they'll know that best, and they'll have their best management practices for that. Okay, so that kind of concludes looking at the overall nutrient trends. Now, we did look at in sort of an introductory slide there. There's a really good proportion of data in this data set where the fields are managed through variable rate, and they're zoned. So we have I think about 60-70% of fields that are coming in are zone sampled. And so what I wanted to do was look at we looked at variability across the prairies and across eco-districts, but we've got a really strong proportion of data in here that are zone sampled. And what I wanted to look at is, what is not the provincial or the eco-district variability. I'm going to look at what's going on within fields. And so what we're going to look at is the NP and K in zone fields and find out what's going on within fields. So the first one here we'll look at is soil test nitrate. And so what we're looking at here is the average minimum within a field and the average maximum for 0 to 24 nitrate. And so what we've got here, and then the gray line is the variability between fields. So what we've got here, I'll just zoom in on, or I'll just speak to rather the 2020 crop year. So what we did is we took, for all VR sampled fields for the 2020 crop year that was submitted to our lab, I took the average maximum soil test nitrate in those fields, and then the average minimum. And so what we see here is a pretty consistent, like these track along pretty similarly here, right? There's definitely a pattern. When we look at the zone sampled fields, we can routinely find about a 50 pounds per acre variance within the field. So this is where we've got, again, looking at the average lows and the average highs in each of these zone sampled fields, we've got a pretty big spread. So in one area, you've got, plus or minus 50 pounds in the same field as you do for another area. So this speaks pretty strongly to, if you're composite sampling and you're seeing field variability, you may want to consider, if you've got the technology to zone the field and you've got technology to variable rate, there's a pretty compelling argument to be made here that within field variability, not only is it within your grasp and within your control to understand, but you can actually do something about it. But a 50 pound per acre spread in the 0 to 24 is reliable. Crop year 2022, this is soil samples coming in fall of 2021, and there were this variability went just through the roof. And there's some areas where we had significant droughts to the point where you can go out in the field, take your shovel, and you could still see the prills laying in the band. And so the spread here does increase a little bit, but the variability went absolutely through the roof. If we look at them in isolation, again, surface and subsurface, this is again primarily 0 to 6 and 6 to 24 sampling design. You see the same sort of spread. You can have reliably about 15 to 20 pound spread in the surface alone, and then in the subsurface we sort of return to that closer to 30 pounds per acre variability. So it's pretty dramatic. Not unexpected, but to look at the data right sort of in the face is a little bit startling. Similar thing here with if we're looking at Olsen phosphorus testing here, modified Kelowna, and again we're same treatment. What's the average in each crop year? What's the average high test value in the field, and the average low? And we've got this pretty enormous spread. So, poor producing zones with much lower residual Olsen P here, but the spread is pretty is fairly reliable, or the range rather is pretty reliable on zone sample fields. The variability. So this is our parts million on this axis here, and then variability is here, and that's that green line there. So a little bit less of a swing. Phosphorus isn't quite as labile and doesn't change quite as fast as nitrogen. Nitrogen, of course, is that's a pretty dramatic behavior over time, but we see it here as well. Same thing with modified Kelowna. Although with potassium here, we're not, the average lows are not approaching sort of a critical limit of 150 parts per million, and the stability is a little bit higher, but there is a significant spread. Pretty reliable, about 200 parts per million spread between average low and average high in the zone sampled fields. I think modified Kelowna speaks kind of for itself. So, what does it all mean? The phosphorus, the P fertility, it is definitely changing. We saw fairly stable systems with the Olsen P and the modified Kelowna. They're not changing a lot over time, but we've got some pretty fields that are testing stably in the deficient or kind of marginal range. So there's not a lot of change going on, but they are by and large deficient. So the other thing we looked at is the risk isn't uniform. We looked at it across the provinces, we looked at it across eco-districts, and then the last two slides there, we looked at it within fields. So that the risk and that diversity is not uniform, not at the micro level, not at the macro level either. So some practical tips to take away is if you don't have a 0 to 6 and 624 sampling design, you may want to consider it. I know there's a lot of there's still a fair bit of 0 to 6 and 6 to 12 we see coming in, or just 0 to 12. Getting to that double depth and down to proper depth is one takeaway we can look at. Consistently sampling every year, we saw how much what the sort of overall trends are for a lot of these nutrients, and collecting samples on a yearly basis is going to let you know as to where your fields lie in that trend. Use VR where you've got variability. I would say that there's variability within every field. I mean, we can look at it. The spread of nitrate, for example, in a single field is pretty dramatic, and it's pretty consistent. So the other bit that I get oftentimes is sometimes people get really fussed about about micros, and they haven't set their major dial, like their large dials on the machine, as far as like getting your NPK and S right. I've heard a number of people, I'm going to try some, let's have a look what's the copper doing across my farm. We really want to address that, and then we've still got the major nutrients not quite dialed in yet. So get the big dial set first. Get comfortable and confident with that. Track your trends, and then you can start to look at micronutrients. And then I've got a closing slide here that I'll have Chris Kennard speak to.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Before I add some comments here, I wanted to ask you a question, and I'll put you on the spot. Sure. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but from the, I guess, 60,000 fields that you reviewed, was there, like, what trend were you surprised of the most?
Well, it depends a little bit on the nutrient. What surprises me is maybe a little more difficult to speak to, because I've reviewed over, I think, 250,000 reports coming out of the lab, so almost nothing surprises me anymore. But over the long term, the situation with phosphate is, I think, is pretty important to take note of. To have that many fields in some really contiguous areas that are not only chronically testing either like marginal or deficient, but the trends are going, that prevalence of deficiency is going up. I think that's a real concern.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So thanks for walking through the data today. And I mean, hopefully the attendees, what you've seen gives some perspective, not just on the soil tests in general, but as Patrick has shared, what the long-term trends are, and what benchmarking can mean to the operation, whether it be a farm or agronomy business. Our goal at the lab isn't just to hand reports, it's to collaborate. Hence, our partnership with Taurus is very advantageous to help spread the good word about soil analytics, both from a chemistry standpoint and beyond. So if any of this has sparked any ideas or questions, we're happy to answer those, but you can connect with the Taurus rep or with us directly, and we're happy to start a conversation. We're also happy to offer, a set of complementary samples to begin benchmarking your fields against this data set as well. See what the insights surface, see if your trends are aligned, if you're seeing something different, and from there we can work together to see what makes sense next. So we will follow up with an offer in an email that allows you to connect with us directly. But if you're comfortable reaching out with us or the Taurus rep, please do so. And I think last thanks to Taurus, Craig especially, for helping us get this set up, and being the host here today, and the collaborations we've seen over the last almost a year of the lab and Taurus working together. So we're happy to have this first webinar for this audience and hopefully many more to come. So thank you. I one more thing, I guess I'd call attention to the chat. Aquina did put in the CEU credits in there as well, so just wanted to call attention to that.
Yeah, and I see in the Q&A section we have a couple of questions. So I'm not sure if Patrick wants to tackle that. I can read them out if you.
These are going to be questions that require some real thought. So one question:
okay.
How are P and K level benchmarking help farmers follow? Some of them I think will need a little bit of elaboration. I'll kind of do my best here with doing it live. But do we correlate soil pH and P level in prairie regions and found any relation? Soil pH and P level. So in that one, I can start to address if I've got the. So the second question here from Rahul Patel. Did you correlate soil pH and P level in the prairie regions and find any relationship? It's sort of pre-concluded, Rahul. People who are submitting soil samples to us, they know their soil's pH really well, and what they are doing is they're selecting the appropriate extraction for their phosphorus. The modified Kelowna and the Olsen are two that we of course provide, but they, the chemistry of that, there are two very different modes of action in order to desorb phosphate from soil. So they behave very differently. In order to find a relationship between it's a little bit difficult because we have people submitting soils. They're sort of pre-selecting the tests that they need. So I think if we were to do a correlation between P and pH, it would probably be confounded with the fact that people are selecting the right soil test for that type of soil. Have we collected? Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
I believe you do 3 different extractions today at the lab, Patrick.
We offer the malic phosphorus as well. Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't look at it in this data set, so I didn't focus on it.
Yep.
Yeah. Rahul as well. Did you collect a 0 to 3 inch soil depth and sample analyze for phosphorus in the fall versus spring in the past? No, we don't have that. But if you want to conduct some research, we're more than happy to chat, and we've certainly done that for different research groups or projects that people have wanted to examine. But that's not in this data set.
Yeah, I would. It's a good thought, and I would argue from our perspective that we talk about deficiency across eco-districts and areas and the trends, but we could see that trend also happening in zero-till at depth, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, whereas the stratification of our immobile nutrients, if we're not actually mixing the soil, you could argue that we're getting more of the concentration near the surface versus 3 and 4 inches deep.
And then the question here that Rahul asked last, maybe we'll take that offline. You're welcome to reach out to me, Rahul, either through your rep or directly, and then we could discuss it. I think it'll need a little more color on that question there in order to kind of understand what you're asking. But all good questions. Thank you.
I have a couple for you, Patrick, before we wrap up.
Sure.
And we've had and this is basis because we've presented this previously. Some of the questions that came were basis the say thresholds that we used and the metrics. If we adjusted the threshold, say on sulfur from 5 parts per million or 10 pounds to 15 parts per million, would that change the mapping? And I guess you could do that if you wanted, if somebody had that question, and it would be the same for, say, something like boron at 0.5 part per million versus 0.75 or 1 part per million. What does that look like?
Yeah, we've got about we've got about 30 or so slides looking at the let's just do it this way here. We've got about 30 or so slides just looking at how the data was treated. There's certainly some compromises in there. If I look at sulfur for, say, wheat or a cereal versus canola or flax, if we look at the cutoffs for some of the micronutrients, there were compromises made where I had to select critical levels that worked for all crops. Because if I were to divide it into the cereals, pulses, legumes, and start to really divide, we're going from like 30 slides to 150 and 250, and it becomes a little bit unruly, and it's a really good way to put people to sleep. But yes, we can certainly, I would expect them, especially if you were to take sulfur from a critical limit of 10 pounds per acre in the 0 to 6 and adjust that or fine tune it to specific scenarios. Yeah, we're going to see changes. Yeah, and we've had clients that said, that's really interesting data, Patrick, you got there. Could you zoom in on my area and set critical limits to this? This is typically what we see, and we have done that. Yeah, we can turn that around fairly quickly. So if someone's interested, do reach out.
Okay. Yeah, so you're actually saying I'm showing you lowest common denominator, true deficiency levels, and we're still seeing these maps. You call it the word drift, which I like, but you're saying the drift in the last 6 or 7 years on not just phosphorus, but a number of these nutrients, we're seeing that drift at a very critical level moving down.
Yeah, and yes, admittedly, the critical levels are set for pretty dire levels. Yeah, and that's just to kind of again be able to speak to many crop types and decision making criteria at once.
Yeah. Okay. I'll wrap with this. So yes, you did mention it. If there are some customers that are currently sending to the lab today that would like to see their own data, Patrick has already said yes, that he will provide those maps. Is that true? Is that?
I've foisted myself into this mire, so yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for offering that service. And if you're not a current customer and you are from a spot on the map where there is no data, we would love to have a conversation with you to see how we can meet your needs to become a customer moving forward. Because when we look at the capability that the lab is providing and the base understanding and knowledge that Patrick and Chris have to decipher your information, I think that warrants an opportunity to have a further conversation with your business, and we'd love to have that opportunity. So with that, thanks for coming on, and obviously thanks to Organize This Sequina for the people that can make it. This is being recorded, so if you want a copy of the recording following this webinar, by all means, we'll get it to you. And with that, thanks for the time. Spring's coming fast, and if you haven't got your samples done for spring, or if you got some growers that would like to actually get some sampling done again, we see nitrogen, urea hitting close to $1,000 a ton, and phosphate has not come off. If you're sitting there saying my fields aren't sampled, by all means, we believe there's a great opportunity to get some analysis done, see where you're at from a starting perspective, and try to make the right decisions going into what is going to be a more of a tight, challenging year for finding profit in agriculture. So thanks again. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, everyone.